It was an ordinary Saturday morning in the sleepy suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek, where families lived in harmony, or so it seemed. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, white picket fences, and homes that seemed to glow under the soft morning sun. Birds chirped, children laughed, and the air smelled like freshly cut grass. Life was simple here. That is, until the storm that brewed when Karen decided it was time to ban sidewalk chalk. Now, let's be clear. Sidewalk chalk had been a part of Willow Creek for as long as anyone could remember. It was a tradition. Every spring and summer, kids in the neighborhood would gather, armed with their colorful chalks, ready to transform the plain concrete sidewalks into their own canvases. Hopscotch grids, elaborate drawings of unicorns, rockets, and colorful hearts. Nothing was too outlandish for these creative minds. Parents would often smile and nod in approval, even taking a moment to snap a picture of their little ones as they got lost in the joy of creating art on the ground. But, as with any quiet suburban town, there was always one person who seemed to stir the pot. Karen Thompson, a woman in her late 40s, had lived in Willow Creek for almost a decade. She had a reputation, the kind that made neighbors hold their breath when they saw her coming. Karen wasn't the type to embrace the carefree spirit of suburban life. No, Karen believed in rules, lots of rules. And above all, Karen believed that every rule must be followed to the letter, especially when it came to maintaining the look of the neighborhood. She would often be seen walking down the street, clipboard in hand, ready to report any perceived violation. A stray weed? Reported. A flag hanging at an odd angle? Reported. Sidewalk chalk? Well, you can probably guess what happened next. It all started one lazy afternoon when Karen was taking her usual walk around the block. As she strolled past her neighbors' houses, she saw the usual scene. Kids on their hands and knees, focused on their chalk masterpieces. Smiling faces, laughter filling the air. It was nothing short of wholesome. But Karen didn't see that. What she saw was a mess. Bright, colorful scribbles all over the sidewalks, staining the pristine pavement. She frowned. "This is unacceptable," she muttered under her breath, her eyes narrowing at the sight of a giant rainbow that was taking up the entire sidewalk. That evening, Karen decided it was time to take action. She gathered her paperwork and wrote a letter, sending it to every home in Willow Creek. The letter was clear and direct. Effective immediately, sidewalk chalk is banned in Willow Creek. This new policy is in accordance with HOA regulations and is enforced to maintain the aesthetic of the neighborhood. Please be aware that any chalk drawings found on public or private sidewalks will result in a fine. It wasn't just a simple suggestion. No, Karen had made sure this was an official mandate. She even included a line at the end that read, "If you witness any violation of this rule, please report it immediately." For Karen, it was just another day of ensuring that the rules were followed. But what she didn't count on was the rebellion that would follow. The very next day, the kids of Willow Creek had gathered outside again. Only this time they weren't drawing with chalk. Instead, they were gathered in a huddle, whispering, plotting something even more creative than their usual sidewalk masterpieces. Word had spread quickly about Karen's new ban, and the neighborhood's children weren't about to let her ruin their fun. They were determined to find a way to get back at her by using her own rules against her. At the center of it all was Jake, a 12-year-old boy known for his mischievous ideas and quick thinking. He was the first to speak up. "Why don't we just paint her driveway?" Jake suggested with a devilish grin on his face. The kids looked at him, unsure. "Paint it with something she'll never be able to scrub off," he added, his eyes glinting with excitement. There was a collective pause, followed by an eruption of laughter and high fives. Jake had a plan, and it was a good one. But they had to act fast. Karen's rule had taken effect immediately, and they needed to catch her off guard. The kids quickly began to gather supplies, buckets of paint, brushes, and rollers. They needed something that wouldn't easily wash away, something that would stay on her driveway for weeks or even months. After some deliberation, they decided on rainproof paint. It was durable, vibrant, and, most importantly, impossible to remove without a pressure washer. As the sun set that evening, the kids quietly crept toward Karen's house, paint supplies in hand. They moved like shadows, trying not to draw attention to themselves as they approached her driveway. It was the perfect target, long, smooth, and wide. As they began painting, the driveway slowly transformed into a colorful work of art, far more vibrant and striking than any chalk drawing could have ever been. But they weren't just painting flowers or patterns. Oh no, the kids had something far more mischievous in mind. They painted a massive mural across the entire driveway, a picture of Karen's face, exaggerated and cartoonish, with a speech bubble above her head that read, "No chalk allowed." Underneath her face was a giant, colorful rainbow, along with the words, "This is our sidewalk." The mural was bold, it was cheeky, and it sent a clear message. Karen wasn't going to stop them from having fun. As they worked, the kids couldn't help but giggle at the absurdity of it all. They knew Karen wouldn't like it, but they didn't care. This was their rebellion. This was their act of defiance. And by the time they were finished, it was almost impossible to believe how much color and life had been added to her once sterile driveway. They stepped back to admire their work. The rainbow hues on the driveway practically glowed under the moonlight, and the image of Karen's face was sure to be a sight to behold in the morning. But they had to act quickly. As the kids dispersed, they made sure to cover their tracks. The last thing they needed was Karen catching them in the act. They scattered into the night, all of them laughing to themselves as they imagined her reaction when she saw her driveway the next morning. What happened next would leave Willow Creek buzzing for weeks. The sun had barely risen over Willow Creek when the chaos began. Karen Thompson, as usual, was up early, making her morning coffee with the determination of someone who prided themselves on being in control. She had a routine, and part of that routine was inspecting her property, ensuring that everything was in pristine condition, just the way she liked it. As she sipped her coffee, her eyes scanned the neighborhood from the window of her living room. The houses looked exactly the same. Neat lawns, perfectly trimmed hedges, and the faint scent of fresh dew still lingering in the air. But as her gaze shifted to her driveway, her heart skipped a beat. There, staring her right in the face, was a huge, colorful mural. Her driveway, the one she had spent years maintaining to perfection, was now a chaotic explosion of color. Her eyes widened in disbelief. The image of her own face, cartoonishly drawn with exaggerated features, was prominently displayed in the middle, with the speech bubble saying, "No chalk allowed." Karen nearly choked on her coffee as her mind scrambled to process what she was seeing. It wasn't just the mural itself. It was the audacity, the boldness of it. Her perfect, clean driveway had been transformed into a ridiculous piece of public art, and the most infuriating part was that it had been done overnight, while she had slept. For a moment, Karen just stood there, frozen. She had been the one to ban the sidewalk chalk, the one who had drawn the line in the sand, and now she was staring at the very evidence of her own failure. Her first instinct was to call the HOA. Of course, the rules were clear. No sidewalk chalk. But this was beyond any reasonable interpretation of the rules. Someone had gone too far, and Karen knew it. She quickly grabbed her phone and dialed the HOA president's number. "Debbie?" she snapped as soon as the line connected. "I need to speak with you. Now." Debbie, the HOA president, picked up the phone with her usual calm tone. "Morning, Karen. What's the matter?" Karen didn't waste any time. "Someone has defied the new ban. There's a mural on my driveway, painted no less. I need you to send someone over immediately to clean this up. It's completely inappropriate, and I won't stand for it." Debbie paused for a moment, clearly caught off guard by the urgency in Karen's voice. "A mural? Karen, are you sure it's... painted paint?" "Yes," Karen nearly shouted. "Rainproof paint. It's big, it's colorful, and there's a huge picture of my face with a speech bubble. You need to send someone over right now. This is an emergency." Debbie took a deep breath. "All right, Karen. I'll get in touch with the maintenance crew and have them check it out. But I think you should also consider, well, why this happened. Maybe we could..." "No," Karen interjected, cutting her off. "This is not about understanding. This is about following the rules. You need to get this fixed." The call ended, and Karen was left with a sense of frustration building inside her. It wasn't just about the mural. It was about what it represented. It was a direct challenge to her authority, and she was not one to back down easily. She marched out of her front door, the cool morning air doing little to calm her nerves. As she walked toward the driveway, she could hear the faint whispers of the neighbors' children who were undoubtedly witnessing her fury. There, sprawled across the concrete, was the defiance of a neighborhood that had finally had enough. Her blood began to boil. She reached for her phone again, but this time, she sent out a mass message to every family in Willow Creek. HOA members, there has been a breach of our rules. Some disrespectful kids have vandalized my property by painting their graffiti on my driveway. I will be addressing this immediately. Be warned, I expect all of you to report anyone seen outside with paint or chalk, especially near driveways. Karen hit send with a finality, hoping to rally her neighbors. She knew this wasn't just about her driveway anymore. This was a battle for the integrity of Willow Creek. But little did she know, the children of Willow Creek weren't backing down either. Meanwhile, across the street, the kids were gathered at Jake's house, eagerly awaiting the fallout from their midnight art project. They had been anticipating Karen's reaction, and now it was here. The thrill of the act was still fresh, and the realization that they had created such a stir filled them with pride. But it wasn't just about creating something disruptive. The kids had a point to prove. They had seen Karen bully their neighbors with her constant rules enforcement. They had heard the complaints from their friends, whose parents had gotten fines for minor infractions. They had grown tired of the oppressive, rule-obsessed world Karen tried to create in Willow Creek. I think we should go see it, Jake suggested, a grin playing at the edges of his lips. I'm sure she's losing it right now. The group of kids nodded in agreement, and they quietly slipped out of their homes, trying not to attract too much attention. As they approached Karen's house, the sight of the painted driveway made them burst into laughter. It was a beautiful mess. The bright colors, the exaggerated face, the bold statement, all of it felt like an act of rebellion that was long overdue. This is awesome, exclaimed Mia, one of Jake's friends. We did it. We really did it. But their celebration was short-lived. As they stood there admiring their work, Karen's car screeched to a halt in front of her driveway. She was back. Her face was red, her fists clenched. The storm that had been brewing inside her had finally come to a head. You kids, Karen shouted, her voice shaking with fury. I am calling the police. But before she could make her next move, the kids scattered, laughing as they ran. Jake, the mastermind behind the whole thing, turned and gave Karen one last look. See you at the HOA meeting, Karen, he yelled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The kids dispersed into the streets, each of them heading home, but the adrenaline was still rushing through their veins. They had done it. They had stood up to Karen, and they knew that things would never be the same in Willow Creek. The next day, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Word had spread fast about the mural on Karen's driveway, and people were divided. Some found it hilarious, a funny and harmless act of rebellion. Others, like Karen, saw it as a blatant violation that needed to be erased at all costs. The neighborhood had never been so divided, and it was clear that this wasn't just about pain anymore. It was a clash of ideologies. Karen wasn't backing down. She'd already filed a complaint with the HOA, demanding swift action. The HOA president, Debbie, was caught in the middle, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. This was a matter far more complicated than the usual rule violations. As the hours passed, Karen kept her vigil over her driveway, waiting for someone to show up with cleaning supplies. But no one came. The HOA maintenance crew had been instructed to stay out of it. They weren't getting involved in the drama. The message had already been sent, loud and clear. Willow Creek wasn't going to stand for Karen's authoritarian rule any longer. The kids had made sure of that. Jake and his friends, meanwhile, were enjoying the sweet taste of victory. They had won this battle, and they knew it. But they also knew that this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to let things slide, and she would make sure to get her revenge. That afternoon, a group of parents gathered at the park to discuss the situation. Most of them had heard both sides of the story and were torn between supporting their children's creative act of defiance or siding with Karen's desire to maintain order. The HOA meeting that evening was sure to be explosive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Karen stormed into the HOA community center, ready to wage war. Her red face matched her fiery determination. She was going to make sure that no one ever thought of breaking her rules again. Good evening, everyone, Karen started, as she took center stage. I am not here to make friends. I am here to restore the peace and sanctity of this neighborhood. What happened to my driveway is beyond unacceptable, and I demand action. She pointed an accusatory finger at the crowd. These children, these hooligans, have no respect for the rules. They think they can paint my driveway and get away with it. I want them fined. I want them banned from ever touching sidewalk chalk again. This has gone too far. Jake and the other kids stood at the back of the room, smiling. They knew this was it, the final confrontation, but they weren't afraid. They had the upper hand now. One by one, neighbors began to speak. A few spoke in favor of Karen, agreeing that the mural was too much, but a majority spoke out in support of the kids. They pointed out that the true problem wasn't the paint. It was Karen's overbearing attitude that stifled any fun or freedom in the neighborhood. I think it's time for a change, said one neighbor. Maybe we've been too strict with the rules. Kids need to express themselves. This mural may be bold, but it's not hurting anyone. Maybe Karen needs to learn that. Karen's face twisted in anger as the comments poured in, but there was no stopping the tide. The room began to shift in favor of the kids. The HOA board, though hesitant, voted to amend the neighborhood rules. Sidewalk chalk was to be allowed, so long as it didn't create a permanent mess. Karen's reign of terror was over. As she stormed out of the meeting, vowing to fight back, Jake and his friends gathered around, grinning from ear to ear. They had won. They had stood up to Karen and forced the HOA to listen to them. Willow Creek was never going to be the same again, and for the first time in a long while, the kids of Willow Creek felt free. And there you have it, folks. A battle of wills, a splash of paint, and a lesson in standing up for what you believe in. Karen might have been tough, but the kids of Willow Creek proved that sometimes the best way to break the rules is with a little bit of creativity. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more HOA drama, stories, and unforgettable moments. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in Jake's shoes? Let us know. Thanks for watching. See you next time.